Elias, hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So happy to have you here. To our audience, I just want to tell you that Elias and I have been speaking for at least 4 or 5 years now. He became a customer of Toon Boom's as far back as Eastwood Media days. And I've always admired Elias, just your creativity. You know, we work with a lot of television and film people, so I have a personal, nice big place in my heart for creative outside of that space. And as Desi was saying, you know, it's also nice to be able to show our community just how many different ways there are to have a good and thriving career in animation outside of just being an animator in a TV studio or for a film. So I think the best way to start, Elias, is for you to talk a bit about your background, you know, educationally, sort of where the creative stuff, you know, even, you know, anywhere you want to start us in terms of your pre-career, career, childhood, but that sort of led you to where you are today. We're interested in hearing a bit about that.
Great, great. Well, uh, I definitely was common to a lot of artists probably. It did start in your childhood, whether you're drawing a lot or doing other forms of art that you're interested in. And certainly the case with myself, drawing all the time, as well as just directing and trying to envision a story. My mother tells stories when I was extremely young, kindergarten or preschool or less, where we had Sesame Street records, and they would tell stories. Bert and Ernie, you know, and Bert would be going through all this sort of adventure stuff along the day, and have this horrible day of all this stuff, and at the end he would open the door, and Ernie would be there, and the gag would be something like, "Oh, where have you been all day?" or "What are we having for dinner?" and Bert would be all, "Whew." But I would have my parents act it out, and I would play the Ernie part at the end that would just open the door. But I wasn't being lazy or just wanting to do the final joke at the end. When they were acting it out, I was directing them and telling them what to do and how to act it out and getting them to react it and being kind of the storyteller or the director to those records, with my parents willingly playing the part of the puppets there when I was in preschool. So it definitely has always been part of what I've done as an artist. A lot of people might want to be Disney animators or other studios, and a lot of people in the ad world might identify with classic ads like "Where's the beef?" To me, childhood, you know, I remember distinctly loving the California Raisins. That was my big childhood intersection of animation and advertising. So I've always loved both.
Great. So, I mean, obviously it was nice too, because it sounds like your parents were very supportive of the sort of your creative side.
Yeah, I guess so. My dad, we were up in Ithaca, New York. My dad was getting his PhD, and my mom was working, but they spent a lot of time, I guess, indulging me on some of those activities. Um,
And where did
so that was really great. You know, it was really great being able to explore that. And I think even those really early on stories are so similar to stuff that happened later on.
So let's move a little forward in your timeline.
Hmm.
From a it was, you know, creative chops. You know, the discipline of being able to, you know, animate or even just to be able to draw. Because I mean, obviously, looking at the creative and looking at the stuff that you do at Flatland, you obviously have a lot of skill. Where does that come from?
Well, part of it, when I graduated college, kind of towards the end of college and after graduating college, the technical world really changed. When I was in school, we were shooting films on film stock and editing and splicing film. But by our senior year, we were cutting on an Avid and a computer. In my film animation classes in school, it was hand drawn on paper. It wasn't. There was no digital cheats really available that you could use. Everything was frame by frame animation. You could pick your frame rate, but ultimately you had to draw on paper and photograph on film, and it was a long process. You had to do all of those frames, and you also had to schedule time to photograph them, and then you had to ship it off and wait for a week for the film to come back and watch it to see if it was any good or not. And the expense of film and film processing was huge. So that was college, but then right during that, the world was changing. I mean, my sophomore or junior year of college, finally got my own computer, and the big debate was, should we get you the 266 megahertz processor or the new 300s or whatever was coming out? A year or two after college, I mean, they were hitting a gigabyte, gigabyte processors, and people had home scanners and digital cameras, and there was animation software available really right as I was coming out of college and going into my career. So things changed drastically. Nowadays, you can get a Blackmagic 4K camera for $3,000. My senior year student film cost over $4,000 just in film stock and processing. Wow. So you really took care in what you were doing. You worked very, very hard at it because you didn't have a second shot at it. When I photographed my senior year animation film, minute of animation, you had that one day to go in there and shoot the film. You had to wait for a week for the film to come back, and that was your project. You got that one shot at it, and you'd only see maybe about 10 seconds photographed earlier in the semester. So you really had to plan and work hard at it. I took it very seriously. 1 minute of animation at 12 frames a second was 720 drawings or something like that. And I didn't want to do any loops. I didn't want to do any less than that. And I came in to photograph the film, and I had a giant stack of paper. And the film teacher said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's my project. That's the 720 drawings." And she said, "Oh, that's what it looks like?" Because nobody had ever done the full 720 drawings before. Everyone, I guess, had used loops or other things, but college for me was a different world. For me, it was access to the technology to even be able to do it. A lot of the art was in my head or on paper, working things out and kind of self-taught in a way. And college was access to being able to get the animation played back to you at 24 frames per second and record it and be able to watch it. And that's so available to everybody now for almost free.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, what was your first job out of college?
Well, my very first job was labeling medical illustrations. So it's not very creative, which explains why I took a clownology course and had some fun on the side. Again, just going back to this creative exploration, no matter what your current job is, you can still be an artist and you can still pursue that. And ever since that moment, I've had various jobs, but whether it's running the companies that I have or whether it was having a job at a different place, I've almost always freelanced on the side. So I did the clownology when I was labeling medical illustrations, and only had that job for probably 6 to 9 months, and then I moved over to a web job. The internet was coming around here right when I graduated college, and suddenly I could get hired locally as a web designer and a banner ad maker locally doing art, and a lot of those jobs didn't even exist before. For my freelance career, I could sell my cartoons and illustrations to people around the country and in other countries. I had a Canadian while that I met online that wanted me to do illustrations and animations on the side. So all that was enabled by technology. It's really changed everything.
So effectively, you were always kind of in your own, you had your own little business going, even if it was a side business, but more what we'd call at that point a freelancer than having a formal labeled business.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always freelance. I had that job doing banner ads and really learned graphic design there. But that entire 6 or 7 years, I was freelancing on the side. So I had actually, I didn't exploit my connections to the Martin Agency very well, because right after graduation, there was a local art magazine that was starting up, and the Martin Agency did some advertising for it pro bono as a local nonprofit art magazine. So they were going around looking for artists to feature. A painter might be on painting on a billboard, and they would have music groups in the TV commercials, and they wanted an animator, and they found me, and so I made a 30-second piece of animation for them. And I think within the year, I was working for them yet again, doing an interactive ping pong game for their website, which was very intimidating. I'd only graduated college for a year or less, and I was being brought into the Martin Agency to do caricatures of their 10 partners of the Martin Agency. You know, and caricatures sometimes aren't flattering. You're kind of exaggerating things, making fun of stuff and everything. So fresh out of school, doing caricatures of the 10 partners of the Martin Agency in this sort of weird Mortal Kombat style ping pong game for their website. And then had a job. So while I was freelance on the side, I really didn't connect or work with the Martin Agency again. It would be probably almost 9, 10 years before I would work for them again. But I should have exploited that connection a lot more.
So is that kind of one of the things that you look, mind you, it's always forks in the road there. So I guess there may be just one of those times where, I mean, there's nothing you can do about that, but did you learn from that in terms of, I mean, exploiting connections and networking must be a big part of how you build your business now as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, you meet people in the strangest ways, and those connections can make a huge difference. When I first started freelancing, left my job, and started taking on work myself, I figured some of it would be some web work and hopefully do some animation or some other things as well, because I was doing some web internet cartoons and things like that, and so I had a small collection of people that were hiring me freelance anyway. So my entire business plan was, I'll be able to scare up some more work. You know, I'll have all this extra free time because I'm already freelancing on the side anyway, so I have all this extra time. I'll be able to scare up some work, and that was my whole business plan. But connections mean a lot. So one of the guys at my old job who wasn't there anymore was teaching art and interactive classes at a local technical college, and they needed some help in the art classes. So I got connected and taught there for a couple of years. And just by getting out and doing that thing, teaching at a technical college, one of the guys who works with me right now, I met through that. 2 other students of mine, their parents worked for some of the major ad agencies in town, and they would tell their parents about me, and I would get called in for meetings or to do work for Walmart, that kind of thing. So one connection can make a huge amount of difference when you're a freelance artist or a small business, and you never know where they're going to come. I never thought teaching at students at a technical college was going to get me some major connections that still mean something to me to this day.
And what did you learn as a freelancer that sort of helped you transition into being a business owner or a partner in a business?
Well, when you're freelancing, you're typically scrambling. You're working from home. You have to learn time management. You have to learn. My biggest change, because I had been an employee before, so all the other aspects of getting work in and sharing your work with people, that salesmanship, treating money in a very different way, was something that I really had to learn by being a freelancer. And if you try to run a larger business before even learning how to kind of manage yourself, it'd be much harder to do. So the first 2 years where I was freelance was really getting used to the stuff outside of art. Suddenly my reading material changed drastically from art magazines to books on marketing and sales and running a business, and figuring a lot of that out so that I could have more to show for what my efforts I was putting in to my success were. And it changed everything. And also, I will say, I did have a lot of exploring technically and artistically to do. I had a job for 6 or 7 years, and I was building banner ads and landing pages and internet stuff, but it was on that system. So when I got out and was freelancing, and you'd meet people that had other requests that you weren't used to getting. And even when I was teaching at the technical college, the students would want to learn things, and I hadn't heard of Paper Vision 3D or some of these other things that were happening. And I suddenly equally did have to dig back into my creativity and art, because now I was not in this perfect closed system that worked for that business. I had a bunch of clients in a variety of different fields that wanted different things, and I had to be very versatile.
I want to go back to something, and I also want to make a point to our audience here, and this is for me fundamentally the most important part and the reason for these webinars, is that everybody that's listening in right now is a creative person and has aspirations to take that creativity and manifest it one way or another. But you said something that is so important. Business is business regardless of whether you're an animator or a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer or anything else you can think of. And I think that's in that transition that you're talking about from freelance to business owner, understanding the business part is something I want to talk about and explore a little bit more with you. Like you said, managing your money, how you spend, how you invest. So why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Right. Well, I would say starting from even just a service perspective on what it is you're doing for somebody. It's very common to think that what you're doing for somebody is the art itself. One of my early freelance jobs doing some web cartoons, the client told me, the thing that he liked about working with me was that I understood it was a business, so when he gave me a due date, I would turn it in on time. I would get it to him. And he had some other artists, and I saw some of the other work, and I thought it was great stuff. As on an artistic level, I was like, wow, that's great. He's working with those people too. Is my work even as good? But apparently they always took 3 times as long as the due date, and I would turn it in on time, because for somebody who's running a website and they need that material, the art matters, but having it available and being able to put it on the website and distribute it matters. If it's some of the entertainment field stuff, movies and TV shows, there's deadlines for a reason to get those shows made. For advertising, they've got airtime purchased, whether it's on the internet or where it's a little bit more flexible, or if it's broadcast television commercials, they've got airtime bought, and hitting those dates matter. So while it's great to do a good job as an artist, that's up to you to do. You need to become a better artist and be able to offer better and better art skills and better design skills. That's kind of expected. If they're hiring an animator, they expect that you're a decent animator, and they've seen your portfolio. The service that you're giving to them, making it so they don't worry, making it so that they feel comfortable that they're going to have a product at the end. If they don't see much from you until the day before the due date, they're worried on their side. 90% of my job is making sure that I'm removing headaches, not being the cause of worry or headaches. That's one of the bigger things I'm selling outside of animation. The animation's expected. Are you a pain to deal with? Are you never available to talk to? Is communication difficult? Do you ask really great questions, make them think more, and take things upon yourself to make the process easier for them, because they've got a lot on their plate too. And if you can remove people's headaches for them, no matter what you're doing, you're going to do really well.
How much does your portfolio, what do you set when you're meeting people for the first time and you get a brief? Well, actually, we talk about how creative briefs, about what you're showing them of background work. I'm kind of interested in all of that. I'd like to understand the process of sort of where you have to, whether it's through a website, it's a Flatland show reel. But even if we go right back to the beginning of Flatland, or right back to the beginning of Eastwood, before there was a portfolio or a demo reel, how were you convincing people to work with you? What was the pitch process like? What was the convincing process like?
Right. Well, the more work you have to show when you're in a visually artistic area, the better. I mean, that is how you win the business, and that just develops over time. The first job that I mentioned getting, where I was just labeling medical illustrations, I went in there fresh out of college. The internet was new. I didn't have any web design background at all. I showed them some illustrations I had done on the side of my own, and this was 1999 or so. And the guy interviewing me said, "Oh, that looks like the new Limp Bizkit album cover. You think you can do stuff like this?" "Oh, yeah, I think I can do stuff like that. I don't know how to make it interact." "Oh, we can teach you how to make it interactive, but you think you could design stuff like this?" Sure. They hired me, for more than I was asking for. They just saw that I was a go-getter and that I was smart and that I could develop with them. But they hired me off of I thought it was a web design job. It ended up being labeling medical illustrations, but they hired me based off a couple of cartoon drawings. And then your portfolio develops from there, and your portfolio is essential, but it can be tricky, because some clients, I found, they want to see exactly what they want already in your portfolio, and when you're talking to them, that's a big part of convincing them you can do the job is, hey, here's exactly what you want. I do it all the time. Not a problem. I have had situations before where somebody asked me, well, we were going over the creative stuff. Have you ever done anything like this before? And I had to be honest, and it ended up being the right thing to say. I was like, oh, I've never done anything like this before. This is new. I'm reaching out to some new areas. This idea we have is pushing the envelope on some things. I'm going to, you have never done this before. And that's exactly what they wanted to hear. They didn't want me, in that particular case, to be doing the same thing that I had done for 20 other people. They wanted to know that I was really, truly pushing myself and making something special for them.
Between
And
between that point though and actually them being convinced that you were the right person for that, what would you show them? Like, what's your pitch material look like in that? Were you doing concepts? Were they giving you a brief? What did you do to convince them to actually hire you?
well, in my case, usually it was just seeing the work. Later on, we developed more of a better online portfolio, and if there was a project, we would develop a proposal. And early on, especially if anything had to do with the web or something like that, they tended to be a little bit more word-driven and technical. But what we found is we are a creative agency, and the more we can make the proposal reflect the kind of work that we're going to do for them, the better. So we try to use our design skills and our work, our illustration work in the portfolio itself. We try to make them really fun to read, simple, provide the right information. But we just had a client recently for a set of TV commercials that we were doing. When we sent them the proposal, that was their response was, even the proposal's creative. This is going to be great. So we try to make the proposal not just informative, but a reflection of our creativity, so that in receiving the portfolio, you're already seeing the kind of work that we're going to do for you.
Cool. So why don't we talk now about Studio Flatland? I'd like you to describe a bit about how you describe yourself, how you describe your services. Are you throwing out a wide net? Are you very specific to a certain type of style or industry or segment? What is the company? What does it do? What does it offer?
Right. Well, I have made the mistake before of most people. If you're talented in something, you might be talented in two or three things. Or if you have an interest, you probably have multiple interests. And so, especially in a freelance world, but also in running a business, you might want to make sure you can make money and do art in all of those areas. But the more things that you list out, the fewer of those things anybody remembers, or the less they really know what it is you really do, or what your sweet spot is. The more you tell them, the less they hear. Right? It's like a TV commercial that tries to say 8 or 10 things in 30 seconds instead of one thing really well. And so I used to kind of list out more of what I was capable of doing, and it would be a bulleted list of a bunch of things. We still do a lot of those things, but it is centered on animation and on that as the core service. So in centering around animation, I can provide a lot of things that are around it. Right? If I just listed off that we do video editing, banner ads, landing pages, HTML5, design, motion graphics, character animation, illustration, it sounds like a lot of different things. But animation's at the center of all of those. Oftentimes a video person, videographer or filmmaker, might not have a lot to do with design or with interactive, right? But an animator definitely has something to do with video, and an animator might have a lot to do with design, and an animator might be able to draw really well and illustrate. An animator might want to make their art interactive, whether it's for internet and presentations or whether it's for games. So at the center of all those things that I would put on my list, the one thing that they all have in common is animation. So we do try to center on that because it allows us easily to jump off into any one of those other areas that's also important to somebody. Whereas if we start with video, how do you make the leap from video to talking about banner ads or offering that to somebody? It's just less likely to make as much sense. So we center on animation as what we say that we are.
Do you see any trends in terms of where your business is going or where it came from? Is it transitioning, let's say, from more TV commercials to more web-based advertising, explainers? Where do you see the industry moving to and your business moving to?
Well, television commercials are definitely still a part of everything on a frequent basis, but definitely a lot of internet. We've done a lot of digital and interactive this year. A lot of the videos that we do, if they are broadcast, chances are they're also online as well. So the online is a major piece of almost everything. If you do something that appears in stores on like a televisions that just appear in stores, maybe that's its own thing. But I don't think I've ever had a situation recently where we've done a TV commercial and that hasn't at least ended up on the internet as a web video as well. In some cases, it's gone the other direction. We've made a web video and it ends up getting a broadcast release, which is unusual, but can happen. We've done a lot of explainer videos, web videos, sometimes a long-form web video that you might cut into 2-minute versions for social media, 30-second versions for a YouTube pre-roll. And that's really good because sometimes out of similar content or the same content that gets edited into these different formats, it allows what you're doing for somebody to see success. Maybe the social media doesn't go over as well, or maybe people don't watch the long-form video, but the YouTube pre-rolls lead to a lot of click-throughs, and the return on investment for them was worth it because they had all these different places where they could use your material. And then since we do all these other things, we're creating that material for you. We don't have to send a bunch of stuff to somebody else to make your banner ads or your landing page. We can do that for you too. We've already got access to all of the same art. We're already familiar with the campaign. We know what everything looks like. We can tack that onto our service for you too, get it all wrapped up.
So effectively, I mean, you also take on a bit of a consulting role, and you can, and that's a great upsell technique, I guess, as well. Say, hey, listen, while we're doing this for you, here's a couple of ideas on how we can repurpose and reuse or create adjuncts to what we're doing for you to really exploit and sort of really leverage the content in multiple medias.
Yeah, it's a good upsell for both parties, and that's what you really got to look for, is that people are getting their value out of it, but that so are you too. If you're only making, like, let's say 2 or 3 minute video, like we've done some of the song videos or something like that, if all you do is post them on a website and want somebody to watch the full thing, they might only be of but so much value. But when you can cut 30-second versions out that can lead traffic to their website through YouTube, you get a little bit more money out of that, and they get a lot more value out of that, yet you're not creating all that stuff from scratch. There's efficiencies on your side, and it's getting that artwork out there in a different way, and it can really increase the exposure that your art is getting, but also really make sure that the client is, if you have that add-on, it's not just a direct multiplier where now instead of 1 video it's 3, so they're paying you 3 times as much. They're getting a good deal because it's just a little bit extra to get you to do that, but they get a lot of extra value out of it. So it's a huge ability to upsell them on that and provide them with 10 times more value than you're charging them for in that upsell.
Do you find that most of your clients are sophisticated enough to understand that and to be asking you for that, or is it more that you're recommending that to them as just a better and more efficient use and ROI on their creative investment?
If they're just making a web video, maybe they just want a webinar on their website or something, it might be something they hadn't thought of, and it's hit or miss whether they would want to use it that way. If they are using the material to market online, then they whether they thought of it or not, they definitely get it right away. Sure, this extra little upsell to us, we're going to get this, and this now, and we can use it in all these different ways. It's very clear to somebody who's already doing internet marketing that gives them a lot of extra ability to use that content. I haven't found that has ever been something that is not at least considered, as well as sometimes just doing more material for them immediately. Like if they want 1 TV commercial, the initial engagement is a huge part of that process. Sometimes doing 3 is much more cost effective than doing 1, and it allows you to put those resources into making it, because yeah, they might be paying you less to do one, but that initial startup on a project and all the stuff you have to create to get anything going at all, their value is much higher on doing 3 than on 1, and your actual profit margin is better too, because on the first one, that's where all your costs are as well. All your costs, all your work, all your development is just to get the first second of animation in the can.
That's a good segue into, we have a question here about just sort of not only how you value your work, maybe how you justify your prices. So I think what you just hit upon might be an interesting way. You see, the point I think that I want our audience to understand is that you become a subject matter expert. You transcend just being able to provide a creative service. Part of the service you're giving is also your expertise and advice. Uh, and like you said, it has to be mutually beneficial. It's ROI. It's like you get more out of it, but the customer also has to perceive that they're getting more out of it too, right? So why don't we talk a little bit about that and a bit about how you value services, how you might, in a very convincing way, say, 3 as opposed to 1 is a better proposition for both the client and for the agency?
Right. Well, one of the things you have to kind of know what they might be open to, and sometimes it's just asking them, whether it's a direct client or whether you're working through some other person as well, an agency. Some of my early television commercials, they had seen some of my web cartoons at one of my friends that worked at a TV station, saw some of my web cartoons, showed those to people, and then they got me to do TV commercials for the television network, television station, local television station. So sometimes you just have to ask the client or them what they're open to. Are you open to seeing some other options? Are you open to what it would look like if we did more of these? That way, when you're running your ad, instead of somebody seeing the exact same one, for the 20th time in 2 weeks, the 3 of them give it more variety and give it longer before any one of them gets old. Are you okay with seeing what that looks like? Those kinds of questions can let you know what they're open to, both creatively sometimes as well as what their financial means are. They might tell you, are you interested in an option for 3 instead of 1? Oh, well, we really don't have a whole lot of money, so we could probably really only afford the 1. Let's just start there. Well, that tells you a lot of information. You might want to give them something that's cost effective instead of wasting your time and theirs coming up with a really expensive option. They're just giving you a hint that you need to look at a solution that fits them better.
Will they typically share what their budget is on something with you, or is that more like they don't want to like tell you how much they're willing to pay because you'll just say, well, that's what it'll cost? I mean, what kind of game is that?
Yeah, well, both can happen. Some people don't want to tell you the budget. Some people really don't have a budget set aside for it, and they want to know what it costs. That can be a very difficult hurdle to address because there is no one set cost. I mean, especially with animation. I mean, with video, there's a wide range that you can do, but at a certain professional level, just to get camera and people and food and a studio and all this stuff, there is a minimum cost at least. With animation, it's very, very flexible on just how much you put into something. So to give somebody a budget blindly, you got to learn your best way to kind of narrow down what fits them. Common technique is just to give them a couple price ranges and see which one that they specific. At that point, they might say, oh, well, we might be able to do this, or all we have available is this, at that point. Or when they're talking to you, you might just find that once you give them some example price ranges, that as you continue to talk creatively, they keep happening to mention the same example price point. That's probably the one that they're gravitating towards, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they keep mentioning the most expensive option, you might be able to do a little bit more for them. You'll have more resources to do more for them, and you can probably more likely consider upsells, probably more likely consider more expensive versions of the animation with maybe more frame by frame, maybe more characters in there. You might have more resources at your fingertips. If they're always citing in the middle, or if they're always citing the lowest end option, you just make different choices that are going to fit them. And you hear that by them repeating the same lower price point. And that way you can serve your time and theirs better creatively, and when you quote, you don't want to blindly give them a price, or inevitably you're going to be way too low or way too high.
Right. Do you itemize on things like that, or do you just charge them and you just decide on a fee? That's what it's going to cost, and the deliverable is the animation? Or do you sometimes also break it down and say, you're paying for this per second, per minute of animation? Does it depend on the client, or do you tend to standardize how you charge?
Yeah, I usually don't itemize in a whole lot of detail. I get a feel more for what part of the project that we're doing and what they already have available going in. So I already kind of know what I list on the deliverable what we will be doing, like if they already have existing characters, but we have to recreate all the artwork because they don't have anything to give us except for illustration examples, then I know that that's where we're starting. If they don't even have characters and they need us to create some, then I know we're going to be doing character design as well. So I know what we might be doing, right? In some cases, they've already got characters, they've already got the soundtrack, they've already got the script, they have tremendously detailed storyboards, and you're mainly animating it. So going in, or you need to figure out going in, what your itemized list of services are going to be, but I don't itemize them out on the invoice or on the estimate. Usually, it usually just includes all of those things, and I found that it's very difficult to itemize them because sometimes, depending on how they then choose to mix and match those line items, it can end up in a really weird package that doesn't quite work right. Sometimes they think, well, if we do the character designs and the storyboarding, then we can lop off this amount of money. But in many cases, if they do that, it can make my animation job actually harder, not easier. Sometimes people will storyboard stuff that if we had storyboarded it, we could get the same thing across, maybe in a more cinematic way, but taking into account their budget, we might be able to do it in a way that would still serve their creative purpose and wouldn't cause a bunch of production headache and expense to produce it, right? So sometimes removing those other jobs from the equation, if you line item that, it might make one of the other pieces a lot harder to achieve, right? Now, instead of designing and then getting the character ready for animation, you've got to work with their designs and get it ready for animation, and that's not always as clean of a process than as if you had designed it. So just taking off the character design out of the budget, if that makes some of your other processes harder, maybe they don't design very animatable characters or characters with a lot of detail, and suddenly all the numbers might not remain the same. So I tend to make it an entire package, assuming that I know the piece of the project that I'm doing going in. Am I doing the whole thing, start to finish, or are we doing a piece of it?
Talking about the we and all of this, I got a question here, and it sort of bridges to a question that I had as well. Obviously, profit and loss is the key to survival. So, one of those things that you have to do in your head when you're charging is you have to estimate the cost of the cost of your employees, the cost of your overhead, and all of that to make sure that whatever you're charging for a project, you're not taking a loss on it. So talk a little bit about that and how you build all that into your pricing. And the specific question that we had that also relates to that is when you're transitioning from that freelancer to business owner and you're hiring animators and assistants, what it actually takes to do that, to start carrying overhead, to start carrying salaries and all of that.
Right. Well, that's definitely a big part of what you have to take into account for a project. If you're a freelancer, I know I started out at a very different price point than I am now, and I started out with a very different set of overhead. I had a laptop and whatever software I was using at the time, and a drawing tablet, and I was working out of what would have been the dining room in my house, but was converted into an art studio for myself. And as you grow, those things change. You learn, well, you get better and better work into your portfolio, which allows you to get connected to better and better clients. So maybe you're able to charge more through either your business skills or your art skills have gotten to a higher level, whatever allows you to charge more. But your expenses do go up the more and more you invest in your company, and that's a good thing. It means that you're growing. Some expenses are great to have, but they do have to be taken into account. I mean, we don't work on tablets anymore. We work on Cintiqs because they can be very expensive. I think the largest Cintiq is like $4,000 or something like that. But the speed that allows us to deliver the content at is astronomically higher. So it's an expense that you want to have. But the ongoing expenses or the expenses directly tied to the project, you can't get those wrong at all. If you're going to do it yourself, which I worked out in my living room doing it myself for many years, you kind of know what you want to make or what you need to make. It's very easy. When you got an office space, you've got software rental, and in order to get the project done on time, you're bringing in 2 other animators, or maybe you have them on staff, then those are monthly expenses or tied directly to the project. And if you haven't determined that in advance, if you're looking at a project and you think you're going to do it yourself, and the next thing you know, you got to hire 2 people to do it, that's a significant profit loss, and you might actually not make any money off of the project if you don't have that planned in advance. One of the things I always have to be careful for is making absolute sure I know where the sound is coming from. Web versus broadcast, there's a wide range in how you can have sound handled, and if that falls into my lap, I need to know that beforehand, because if I give somebody a price point that doesn't include recording voice actors and doing sound design, and it's for broadcast, that includes studio rental, the actors' fees, all sorts of extra expenses that can knock sometimes thousands of dollars off of the bill right away if you don't know that going in. And obviously hiring people can knock off just as much and totally change what a project looks like. So you have to get those down. But investing in those, is an important thing. I mean, one of my big opportunities locally, I wanted to dig deeper into animation, and I said, I don't know if we're going to get massive amount of extra animation work in, or if I'll do independent films, but I want to invest in my animation. So I picked up, I think it was Animate Pro at the time that you guys had, prior to making the move over to Harmony. I picked that up and Storyboard Pro, and I bought my first Cintiq. It was kind of like my end of the year tax write-off business expense to invest in that. And within 2 months of that investment, because this was like November, December, by February, the local baseball team had heard about us, and we were doing animation for them, and they ended up saying yes to, I think it was 45 seconds of animation. They ended up saying yes to it 2 weeks before opening day of their inaugural season, and they wanted the animation for opening day. They didn't want it a week later. So we had 2 weeks to do it in, and it was a huge opportunity because baseball was back in Richmond, so everyone was talking about it, and so that was a big deal for us. But if I had not made the investment in the software and in the Cintiq, I don't think there's any way I would have been able to finish that in time. That investment paid off instantly to be able to achieve that in time. It made up for it in the cost.
Good. Just to let everybody know, we have about 8 minutes left. Elias, that's also to let you know I've got a couple of questions I want to cover here that have been handed in to us. There's an overlap between a few of them, so we could talk a bit about how you promote yourself and how you go and get your business, and where you're finding business. So, advertising versus web, social, trade shows, and even whether you invest in any marketing of your services. I mean, so can you talk to us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have an online presence with the website itself, and we've experimented with a bunch of other avenues. Connections of some sort always tend to be the best. I mean, we've done pay-per-click, we've done sending out newsletters that just feature your work, postcards. We've tried a bunch of things. We've had animation representation before, but connections are definitely the thing that makes the biggest difference. If somebody meets you, and that which can happen in a variety of different ways, certainly conventions. There's always, in the town or city that you're in, there's probably a marketing or an ad club where you can meet other people that are there. There's on the filmmaking entertainment side, there's always filmmakers groups, film office in your state, and places where you can be positioned and meet other people that are in a similar industry. For a lot of artists, they might go after specific industries. There are graphic design places that only do logos for sports teams. Well, instead of just going to graphic design and advertising industry-related things, they might go to sports-related things for the industry that they actually do their artwork for. So there's a bunch of things you can do. I know you've mentioned Kidscreen before, and we're looking at trying to put together some of our own actual content and hitting Kidscreen a few times and making some connections into that world. So it's going to be a matter of meeting people on a smaller scale. Let's say you're just starting out. It can truly be anywhere. I told you about some major contacts I made by teaching at a technical college. My first TV, I think it was, probably my second TV spot and a big web project I got. I was meeting with somebody that I had met at a networking event, and I was meeting with them about doing their website at a sushi restaurant, and the owner of the sushi restaurant happened to overhear and paid me to do the website and 2 TV spots for him because I went out to eat sushi. It can come from anywhere. The thing I did for the art magazine from the Martin Agency, they had learned about me because when I was at VCU, I had a job checking out media equipment. One of the people I checked out media equipment to was running a film festival locally. When they were looking for artists to feature and they had some TV spots, they wanted some local filmmakers. They talked to him. He mentioned some local filmmakers, but animation sounded different too, so he mentioned me. Those kind of connections. I mean, I didn't have to sell them at that point. They called me and said, "Hey, this guy said you're an animator. Do you want to do this?" It was almost like you're already in the door when you have a connection.
Do you cold call, though, or do you ever target certain businesses or segments of businesses and start making lists and cold calling?
You definitely have lists. You want to know what your dream clients are or who you want to target. Cold calling, not really on the phone cold calling, but we have, speaking of the Flying Squirrels, for instance, that was the local baseball team. Their name was the Flying Squirrels, which was kind of controversial in the area because it's kind of a silly name or whatever, and people had mixed feelings about it. It's a very kind of wacky, silly name. But when their logo came out, it was kind of cool and tough looking. He had angry eyebrows and streaking through the sky or whatever, and I saw the logo and I was like, I want to animate that. We've got to animate that. And so we did approach them over and over again, and they were the hottest news in town. Everybody wanted to work for them. So we got nowhere for quite a while, just trying to say, hey, we'd like to talk to you. So at a certain point, I just did some pencil test animation, and once they heard, hey, we've got some animation, some test animation we think you'd like to see of your mascot, Nutzy, the flying squirrel, doing some stuff, immediately it was, let's go out to lunch, let's talk. They saw it, let's make a deal, right? So we had to pursue that for a while to hit the right person up and say something maybe more to them than just, we'd like to do stuff for you. We'd like to do stuff for you. We told them, you want to see your character running around? We've already got some stuff we want to show you. And that piqued their interest enough to meet with us. So we definitely targeted them, and I guess you could say cold call was email-based, but we targeted them pretty specifically.
Well, that's cool. I think, well, first of all, we're going to wrap it up now because we're 3 minutes out from a hard deadline. I think they actually shut us down. But I guess that's a nice takeaway, which is that sometimes when you're inspired by a certain brand or a certain company that, taking that leap to do a little bit of creative and showing them, visually. Even as a salesperson here at Toon Boom, I'm always amazed at the lack of imagination that creative people have sometimes, and that, visualization is an important way, and fundamentally an important way to sell your ideas, right?
Yeah, I think I was talking to you before about one of our big jumps into doing some creative concepts for a pretty significant company was crayon drawings. And I got contacted saying, well, have you ever done children's animation? And I was like, animation of children or animation that looks like children drew it? Animation that looks like children drew it. And it just happened to be that I had read on Animation Nation or someplace like that that a tip for character design was drawing in crayon because you have to stay loose. I was like, oh, that's creative. That's kind of cool. So I just naturally did the extra step. I went and got a cigarette case that crayons about the same size as a cigarette, so I got a nice, cool designed cigarette case, filled it with crayons, drew in my sketchbook in crayons all the time for character designs to stay loose. There was no business objective to that. It was part of my creativity. But yet, when somebody called and said, the creative spot wants animation that looks like a child drew it, I had gobs of drawings done in crayon to show them.
Awesome.
That's really great, Elias. I mean, you have such a wealth of knowledge. I think we could probably continue for another hour, and I feel like I would learn a lot more. But sadly, we're out of time. Hopefully, we've answered most of your questions. If we didn't get a chance to get to them, please feel free to email us at webinars@toonboom.com, and we'll get to them shortly. If you wanted to listen to this webinar again, we'll have it up on our website later today or tomorrow at toonboom/webinars.com. Sorry, toonboom.com/webinars. And that's it for now. So again, thanks, Phil. Thanks, Elias. You guys are great.
Yeah, thanks, Elias.
And I'm really happy we got to do this. So thank you.
Goodbye to everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Elias, yes, you were going to say?
Oh, I was just saying thank you and goodbye to everybody as well.
Okay, everybody, we'll see you for the next one in a couple of months. Bye-bye.